Now it is time for our neighborhood food network call, and we're very happy to have Megan Cain back on. And you're going to introduce her. We've had her before. Many of you know and love her.
Yes, we have Megan on, and she's actually agreed to be one of our advisors. And one of the things we love about Megan is it's simple and easy gardening advice. And here's her little bio on her page, which I love. Her mission in life is to help gardeners cut through the noise and all of the overcomplicated gardening advice out there by keeping it simple. She goes, she offers up smart solutions that work to get you more food from all of your gardening efforts. And she's every time I have a question for her, she gets right back to me. I have her book and I've lost it for the second time in the house, but I have her book. It's wonderful. I just found a Christmas present, guys, that I'd lost. So I don't know what it is. So anyway, Megan, you're on where I can't see her.
Yep, I can see you. I'm right next to you in my screen.
Different. Everybody's screen is different.
So but I'm here. My camera's on. My sound's on.
So Megan is from Madison, Wisconsin, which is right up here by me. And that's how I met her, by going to the Garden Expo and listening to her talk. But she is spending a couple of years in Arizona. So she has a completely different growing experience going on down there. But what I'd like to talk about is, what we did have Rick from our Stony Acres on a couple weeks ago talking about, getting seeds started. And I know that you had talked once about seed starting mix, or if anything you can recommend for all of us getting ready for the upcoming growing season.
Yeah, and I'm happy to answer if there's other lingering questions about seed starting. I'm happy to answer questions or garden. It's kind of like the seed starting and garden planning time of year. Or if you have questions about varieties, or if you've struggled with certain things, I'm happy to answer questions.
I had fungus gnats, and so I started baking so I bought those great big Pro Mix things from Menards, and they said that your seed starting mix can be sterile. It doesn't matter if there's any, microorganisms in there, because everything that's needed in the seed is in the seed. So I was taking it in my biggest stainless steel bowl and literally putting it in the oven at 200 for like 3 hours. And I still have those fungus gnats downstairs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sorry. I'm having continuing video problems that I can't figure out. Is it down your basement?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think sometimes the basement can be tricky because it's cool. Not as warm.
I have a drain in there that the furnace, the hose runs a little bit across the floor and then down into the drain. So that could be the problem too. I'm just going to learn to live with them, but.
Yeah, they don't really do too much damage.
What temperature should it be in order to sprout seeds?
Well, it really depends on the seed. So anything that's a cool season crop. So think about the things that you plant in early spring, lettuce and kale and broccoli. They like cooler temperatures. So I haven't found, if you start in a basement and your basement's really cold, you could have some issues with germination. If you start seeds, I just start them in my office and it's fairly warm up there, then all the cool season crops should germinate pretty easily. But where I've had trouble are the warm season crops, particularly peppers. Like the soil temperature to be pretty high, say 85, which even in a south facing window in my office, I've had trouble where the peppers take a very long time to germinate, like 3-4 weeks. So I've started, after that happened a few years, I started to use a seedling heat mat. So it's almost like a little low grade heating pad that is specifically for seedlings because it doesn't turn off.
And once they sprout, you shut the mat off, right?
Well, sometimes for peppers, I'll leave it on for a while to get them to kind of jumpstart growing. Something like tomatoes, I would take it off right away because they grow so quickly anyway. Yeah, so it's mostly for peppers that I use it for, but sometimes I'll use it for tomatoes or tomatillos or eggplant. So you can think about anything that you plant after your last frost. I'll use it for those. But yeah, I don't want things to grow too quickly because I have left the seedling heat mat on something like a tomato, and then the tomatoes are huge before I have a chance to put them
So
outside.
these cool season crops, like I've actually started kale. They're only like this big right now. Can those be, I can't remember, can those be planted out before our last frost? Because our last frost is at the end of May.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have found, at least in Wisconsin, and I know people are from all over the place, but most people in Wisconsin, which is a pretty cold climate, wait too long to plant. So a lot of times people in Wisconsin say, oh, I plant my whole garden Memorial Day weekend because it's after last frost. But I like to say that if you wait until after your last frost to plant your garden, you miss out on a whole season of the garden, which is the early spring season. So I generally recommend that people start planting about 4 weeks before your last frost. So where I am in Madison, it's usually around Mother's Day is average last frost. So I start planting in my garden about mid-April, depending on the weather.
For those of you who don't know, we're in zone 5. Well, I'm in 5B. I don't know what you are.
Yeah, ours is kind of AB.
So yeah, so we're in zone 5. So this is good to know because I'm always very impatient. I want to get my stuff, especially I want to get the broccoli and the cauliflower and the kale out.
Yeah, and all those things are frost hardy. It does, if it's going to get down to 20 degrees, they're probably not going to be happy, but that's not very common in the spring, even in Wisconsin. So they often thrive in the cool weather.
So what have you planted thus far, both of you? I'm asking Anne and Megan. And when are you going to put them in the ground outside?
Well, I just have two I have some herbs started. I have a lot of parsley started and stuff like that. That I probably won't put out till a little later, but I do have 72 kale plants started of 2 different kinds. And that's why I was asking Megan.
So kale and herbs, and when are you going to put
And
them?
then I'm going to be starting. So I am going to be probably, I don't know, Megan, you can let when I could start the broccoli and the cauliflower. Is it too early to start those as from seeds?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it depends on how fast things grow. If you're growing in a basement, you might see slower growth.
Well, I have a oil-filled radiator on down there.
Okay, so it's pretty warm.
So, and I have heat mats under all my trays,
Okay.
which yeah.
So generally for me in Wisconsin, this time of year, I'm only have my onions and leeks started. But it's because I don't like my plants to get too big before I put them out. So I don't want huge 2-foot seedlings. I like my seedlings to be somewhat short and stout and stocky, not tall and leggy and like falling.
I did
over.
that last year. I literally had to support some of my tomato plants before I took them outside. And a lot of my I did a lot of zinnias and they got way too big. And then when the first big wind, they just fell over and never came back up. So yeah, I've learned my lesson.
Yeah, so it's a little bit of a learning experience. Some things germinate quickly and grow quickly, like zinnias. So I wait until maybe a month before I'm going to plant those out because I know from experience that they germinate quickly and then they get tall really quickly. Tomatoes grow pretty quickly, but then at the other end of the spectrum, I find that peppers grow pretty slow, even if that's why I keep a heat mat on them sometimes to get them to grow a little bit faster. So depending on what zone you're in, it's kind of working backwards. When can you put things out? So for Anne and I, we could start planting about mid-April, but you'd only plant things like broccoli and kale and cauliflower, all the cool season crops. And so then you kind of work backwards and say, okay, how long is it going to take for them to grow to transplant size? Could be 6 weeks, could be 8 weeks.
So when the seed packet says, start seedling 6 to 8 weeks, I'm such an eager beaver that I was taking that 8 weeks, and then I found out that a lot of my stuff got way too, my laundry room looked like a jungle.
Yeah.
By the time I was able to get the stuff outside. So now I'm going to go more towards the 6 week part of it. It's 2 weeks, they can grow pretty fast once they get going.
Yeah, I've had the same experience that I've gone on the shorter end. so you can look at the seed packet, and if you say, okay, I'm going to plant my broccoli around mid-April, I should plant it 6 weeks before, or start the seed 6 weeks before. That would be the beginning of March. If you want to go 8 weeks before, it would be about mid-February. And so you could just keep notes. That's what I do. And sometimes I have a seed starting notes that I keep, and then I'll just say start kale later next year if it gets too big, or start tomatoes later. Or you could, if you have a seed starting calendar, sometimes I adjust the calendar, and one year I thought, I'm not going to start tomatoes 8 weeks ahead of time. I'm going to bump it to 6 weeks before.
Yeah, Mark was saying very lanky tomatoes to one set of leaves. Well, yeah, Mark, mine were so big, I was digging trenches to get them started, and it worked out great.
And
Yes.
Anne, I'm officially reminding you not to plant 70 tomato plants. You told me next year, smack me if I want.
Well, I also
70
had a
tomato
bunch of
plants.
volunteers pop up, and I just kind of let them go. So I
Yeah.
had 90 tomato plants in my garden last year.
Oh,
Oh
that's
my
nuts.
gosh.
So what that means, for those of you who don't know what that means in the fall, like September-ish, all Anne does is can tomatoes. Like, she has no social life. She's no time for anything else. That's all she's doing is canning tomatoes.
So yes, this year I'm going to dial it way back. But
Yeah.
I actually
Good luck
built
with that.
a couple extra beds last year, so now I have.
Oh, see, now you've got room for 'em.
Does anybody have a question that they want to come off of mute to ask about seed starting or garden planning, or anything that's on your mind this time of year?
You've got an expert.
So different than all of y'all have been discussing. I'm in zone 9.
Oh, so
Um,
lucky.
A few tropicals I can grow in addition to subtropicals. And some years I have had tomatoes growing all year, being perennials like they are where they began in this world, perennials. They're colder climates, they're not perennials, but where I live, some years they can be. I just harvested a few cherry tomatoes last week, in fact. So, every place is different, every year is different. Every
So you're in California, right, Pat?
Southern California.
Yeah, what zone are you in now, Megan, in Arizona?
Yeah, I was just gonna look up Tucson's. It's frost this time of year. Let's see.
Really?
Yeah, there's frost a lot of nights. So you can't. I had basil planted and I didn't cover it, and it died like 6 weeks ago. So
Yeah, and Sylvan
yeah,
was
it
saying
says
staggered.
zone 9, but do you get frost in Southern California?
Oh,
Is it common?
below us, we get frost, but up, where our house is, we never had a hard frost. It's just the microclimates thing.
Yeah.
So
There's a really great blog, Pat. I was going to tell you about Homestead and Chill. That's another great gardening blog, and they are outside of San Luis Obispo. And so it's kind of California. I love reading their blog because they have avocado trees and all kinds of things that they grow.
We've got avocados we're eating right now, and we have a tree in a peach tree that's blossoming. It's a little hard out in another yard.
So Eileen has a question. Do you use copper gardening tools and structured water as per Victor Schauberger?
I've never heard of him. I don't even know what structured water is. I'm gonna have to look him up.
I would imagine that would just be for pots, not for your entire garden. That would get quite expensive.
Do you know what structured water means? What does that mean?
I believe it's the water that's charged, like negative ions.
It's kind of mimicking the running water over like in a river, I think. I'm
the
not
swirling vortex. Yeah, maybe those were. Eileen, maybe you can explain more what you mean by that, because I have a certain idea of what that means, but it may be different from what you're saying. And if you would anybody know, would you explain why, Eileen, you might use copper gardening tools? I use whatever gardening tools are the cheapest and closest next to me. I don't think I'm going to be buying copper, but if there's a really good reason for that, maybe you put that on a Christmas list. That might be great.
Maybe it's good for the soil. Maybe it adds copper to the soil.
Yeah, I'll have to, I just put them in my Google search bar to remind me to do some reading later. I did see, oh, so somebody said, what about gardening in pots? They do not grow as robustly, but is there a trick to make the plants happier in a pot? Yeah. So I would say one of the biggest challenges with pots is that you have to water a lot, especially if you're growing vegetables, because they're going to you want them in full sun or as much sun as possible, unless maybe you live in Arizona or somewhere like that in the summer. But so the nutrients leach out of the pots very quickly because you're watering 1 to 2 times a day. And so you need to fertilize on a much more regular basis, as opposed to when I garden in the ground in my garden, I'm only really fertilizing right before I plant something. And so that would be one consideration. Make sure you're fertilizing, depending on how big your pot is, or if you have a bigger container, it could be less, but probably every 2 weeks. And if things are turning yellow or things that seem stunted, it means likely that they need some more nutrients. And then it's really watering, staying on top of the watering so things don't dry out. Some of the things like the Mediterranean herbs, if you had thyme or you had mint or you had marjoram, it would be fine if they dry out a bit. But some things are going to really stress, like lettuce. If it gets really hot and dry and you let the pots dry out, you could kill things within a matter of days.
I was watering my lettuce almost every day and it was fabulous. So yeah, it does like a lot of water. We have a question here from Carla that says she's interested in starting a garden in her apartment. What's the best veggies to grow?
So inside?
Do you have a balcony?
Yeah, she lives in New York.
Yeah, no balcony. I'll have a rack. So I was trying to see if it was possible I could kind of set that up somehow. And because I used to garden when I was a little girl in the West Indies, but I don't have that option here. So I just want to do it, especially knowing how they're tampering with our food. So
yeah, well, one thing you could do if you have a rack and you're able to do some overhead light. So one thing that's a challenge of inside is that even with the south facing window, it only gives light really from one side. And so then your plants are always kind of stretching. So ideally, if you could do some kind of overhead light, and I actually have a little system that I'm growing some stuff inside just to experiment. And I have found that the leafy vegetables grow faster. So we've grown cilantro pretty quickly, lettuce pretty quickly. Kale you could do pretty quickly.
Yeah, we like kale.
We have tomato, like a little mini tomato planted, and a pepper, and they are really slow. I don't even know.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, so think about leafy things that grow fast.
Okay.
Even radishes, they grow pretty quickly.
Okay. Yes, thank you.
I did a lot of lettuce in my basement last year, but I had such a bad fungus gnat problem that it caused a lot of issues. So I was literally down there every day with a vacuum cleaner on. And then I'd shake it, and then I was trying to vacuum up, and then spiders would spin webs, and I'd be like, go for it, guys.
Eat up. Somebody said, please talk more about cilantro. I love talking about cilantro. Cilantro can be tricky to grow. And I think one of the hardest parts is that it bolts in the spring, early summer, which if you're not sure what that means, you've probably seen it happen, where it pushes up basically the flower stalk, and it's going to flower and go to seed. And hot weather, and even more so the lengthening days, trigger it to bolt. So it can be difficult to grow, especially if you waited to plant until the end of May. The days are pretty long at that point. And so for people in a zone more like mine, I would recommend planting it fairly early. So that's one of the things I plant 4 weeks before last frost, about mid-April where I am, because it thrives in cool weather. I just direct seed it. It germinates pretty easily when it's cool out. And then I'll get a few harvests before it bolts, but it really pretty much.
What about the slow bolt cilantro that they have?
I know, I've tried all the varieties. It's still going to bolt eventually, unless you have partial shade that could help. that could help potentially, but it is partly the lengthening days, and we have no control over the fact that the days are getting longer. But I also plant it again in the fall. So I plant it usually where I am third week in August. And then because the days are getting shorter, I used to say it never bolts, but it bolted 2 years ago for the first time ever in 20 years, because our Augusts and early Septembers are getting hotter where I live. So I think it was stressed out. But in general, in a typical year, it won't bolt. And so it's very frost hardy. And so you can have a really nice harvest in the fall. I actually find it a lot easier to grow in the fall.
Can you explain what bolting means for some people who may not be aware of that?
Yeah, it means that it's pushing up of basically a flower stalk. So it's, instead of being in the phase of leaf production, it's something is triggering it, either heat or stress, or it could be lack of water, to send up its flower stalk so it can start to reproduce instead. And so really what happens is it stops producing leaves, it stops focusing on that part. Sometimes things can get really bitter when they bolt. So you've probably seen it happen to lettuce, where it starts to get really tall and shoot up a stalk. It happens to spinach. It happens to cilantro pretty easily in the spring. So those are kind of the most common things that you see bolt. So really with all those things, I have much more success growing them in the fall, because they don't tend to bolt and they like the cool weather of fall. So that's one thing to think about. If the things that you plant in early spring, you can also plant again for a fall garden, depending on where you live. Here in Tucson, I planted cilantro in October and I'm harvesting it now. So it really depends on what zone. Yeah, it's been I've mostly gardened in the Midwest. And so it's been a very interesting learning experience to grow in a completely different bioregion.
I know, it's February.
Yeah, we have grapefruit, lemons, blood oranges, and then all the typical spring, the spring crops of Wisconsin, where we have radishes and turnips and broccoli and cilantro and kale. So yeah,
I forgot to harvest a bunch of my carrots last fall. Will they be, could they were in a raised bed, but
yeah, it depends what happens with the soil. So if the bed freezes, the carrots tend to turn into mush.
Okay.
If you got a bunch of snow and the ground never freezes, then you can harvest them. Last winter, I usually harvest the rest of my carrots in December before the ground freezes in my garden, but we just had a lot going on and I didn't get to it. And so I had them in a low raised bed. I covered them with hay, then with a tarp, a big thick layer of hay and a tarp, and then I put boards over the tarp. And I prevented the ground from freezing in that bed. And so my husband actually went out in March once it warmed up, and he dug out all the carrots, and they were delicious, so sweet. So really the key is you have to prevent the ground from freezing. And you have to cross your fingers, because I also did it one year, many years ago, where a vole or a mouse found the carrots. And so then when I went back in the spring to harvest, I'd pull things up and there'd be like nothing there, which was really depressing.
Well, it's a 24, it's a pretty high raised bed. So I'm thinking it probably froze.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Anybody else have any other questions for Megan for planting? Everybody know how to find your garden zone? Right, on our website on Neighborhood Food Network, you can find how to find your garden zone. It's under planning, right, Ann?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to pull that up now. So everybody, if you haven't seen the beautiful website that Ann did, we highly encourage you to go there and check it out. And let's see, resources. Sorry, I don't have my screen big enough here now. Reminders by zone. Oh, you already have to know your zone here to go here, but this is a great tool. If you haven't done this yet, I'm very proud of this. This is my idea, my contribution to the website. And I had one of our assistants go in and find out all the tips that you need for your garden zone. If you click on this, you can add it to your Google Calendar or your Outlook calendar. And on the first day of the month, for your garden zone, you will get a tip of like, of here's the seeds you could be planting right now, the things that you need to be doing. So where is the garden zone section, Anne?
Go to,
Get started?
under resources, helpful links,
Under resources, okay.
up, over, up.
Here, okay, thank you. Okay, helpful links, thank you. Okay, so here you go. Here you can find your planting schedule, your USDA planting hardiness.
Oh, look, there's the creative vegetable garden.
Oh, thank you.
There she is, creative vegetable gardener, high mowing organic seeds, how to buy topsoil compost or mulch in bulk, the Gaia Share community. How much space do I need to grow food? You may be surprised on how much food you can grow in a small space. And a harvest tracker, track your veggie harvest as well as your savings. So food gardening network. So we've got like a lot of really great resources here. Here's Azure Standard is one of our favorite resources as well, for if you're buying food in bulk. So really great.
I'll put my
People may
website.
have a few more questions for Megan. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll put my website in the chat. I have hundreds of articles on my website, and they're not fluffy articles. They're very informative articles. And then I also have a newsletter. I send out an email every Sunday morning. So you're welcome to sign up on my website or just browse around and see what you can find.
Let me just
So,
share your website again.
Oh, so wait, can you see?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
You can
so,
put it on the Creative Gardener too, just to show people her
so
website.
also if you look under our advisors, we have Mark Dudla and we have Megan Cain with links to her site
Okay.
too.
Great.
And
Awesome.
one thing I also wanted to
Click
tell
on her
you that
website.
I've been working on, I have done it for 2023. I haven't gone back yet. So when we have our weekly calls, I will be sending out the e-blast, but so we had Valerie on last week, but if you click here on this button, it'll expand down and all the links for that we discussed on the call will be on there, as well as the link to watch the entire call on YouTube. So I've done that for all the 2023 calls, and this call will be no different. It'll be listed on top here tomorrow.
It's amazing, Anne. What a valuable resource.
So,
Really
well, yeah, because people put a lot of great links into the chat. Nobody's going to see that on the YouTube. So I wanted to make sure everybody doesn't miss out on any of these great tips. And
Great. Can you go back and click on, well, okay,
Oh, sorry.
I'll share. We want to share the Creative Vegetable Gardener website.
Thanks.
Everybody can see her website as well. So she's got some great resources under books and courses as well. And you can also hire her to be a consultant for your garden, to work with her. And yeah, so work with me, speaking and teaching.
She's great. That's how I found her when
Gardening
she was giving a talk, and she was very, very engaging. Well, she's engaging here too. So
Yes,
Thank you. Yeah, there's my new post. I just read it last week about record keeping for the season. So that's a good thing to think about this year before you start, because I found that keeping records from year to year has helped me become a much better gardener.
So give us an example of how you would do record keeping.
Yeah, so I have a map of my garden. That's probably my central part of my record keeping, where I just hand drew. And then whenever I put it in a binder, which I talk about in the article. So I have a binder with the current year's map. So it starts out blank. And then every time I go out to work in my garden and plant, I write down the date, the variety, and how many I planted. So for me, it's kind of helped me reverse engineer my garden. So I pretty much know, okay, I don't need more than 12 basil plants. That's how many I usually plant, 12 to 15. I plant 300 to 500 onions, depending on the year. I plant 220 garlic. I plant 35 peppers, because over the years I've refined it, and it changes periodically, right? Your diet changes or your household size changes. And I've also learned my favorite varieties, what varieties perform the best, because I keep track. So if there's something that I say, oh, that pepper was really great, I got a lot of red peppers from that plant. Oh, what variety is that?
and then you write it in the binder.
Yeah, it's always in the binder because I used to stick the little tags next to the plants, but they disappear, they fade. I don't know what happened to them. The garden trolls steal them. I don't know. They would just be gone by the end of the season. So I eventually, after doing the same thing over and over that didn't really work, I thought I should write this down instead. That would be a better idea. So that's something I have in my binder. And actually I shared in the article a template. I used to just have sheets of paper that I would just write things down on, but it felt disorganized. And so I thought what I really want is notes about each thing I grow. So I created in Canva a little template, which I share in the article, where I didn't do it for every vegetable, but the vegetables that I tend to have a lot of thoughts about. So I have like a page for basil, and then I have like how many I planted. I write down my favorite varieties, because there are times when I order seed that then I just forgot. Oh, I forgot that I liked, whatever variety of basil, and I didn't order it. And so I thought, okay, I need to get more organized. So yeah, maps, vegetable specific pages. I have a planting calendar. So in that link, if you struggle to know when to plant things, I have an article on my website, which also you can print out a template where you fill in when is your average last frost, and it helps you count back, just like I was talking to you before. 4 weeks before last frost, it lists everything that you can plant. So I also keep my planting calendar in my binder so I can see, okay, it's the 4th week in April. What should I plant? I'm like, I don't know. Let me just look at my planting calendar. It'll tell me exactly what to do.
So I thought I had this in the website, but I don't. So I'll have to add it back in. I think I had it on the old website. I might not have transferred over. They have this stuff called, they have garden markers on Amazon, and I tested them, and the sun did not. But to your point, and I think I talked about this on a previous call, I planted like 70 some pepper plants last year. And I'm like, I'll remember that this row is all this and this row is all this. Well, I planted jalapenos and jalapenos. I had no idea.
I've done the same thing, and I'm like, oh, I'll remember this. And then 2 months later, I'm like, I don't even remember what I was going to remember.
So I'm going to make sure that I'm going to try and label every single plant, and I'm going to try and be better with, like you said, laying out a map. So yeah, those are the things I learned from last year, and not plant so many tomatoes.
What about 72 kale? Are you going to plant 72 kale?
I probably had about that. I had 2 beds of kale because I had like 7 different varieties.
Yeah.
So
I'm gonna have to come visit your garden, Anne. This sounds impressive.
I actually dehydrated a ton of kale, and I would dehydrate a ton of broccoli leaves and all that, because I make my own greens powder for my smoothies. So, and this year I also plan on everybody that dandelions are super nutritious. So I'm planning on going out when they first start coming in and collecting some leaves and consuming those. I see Pat, you have your hand up.
Everything you're saying is so important. I just wanted to throw in, if you don't know about them, for perennials especially, some of you might be interested in either the North American Fruit Explorers, or NAFEX for short. And another organization that I like is California Rare Fruit Growers, and it extends into Tucson also, by the way. It's not just in California now. Both organizations teach you how to do things like propagate, like select varieties, like graft. I'm not into grafting. I prefer from seed, more like nature. But yeah, that there's so many directions you can go. You can combine the perennials and the annuals. It takes a little figuring out, and it takes more rich soil, more compost, if the soil's supporting the different levels of the food forest canopy.
Yeah, I put the link to NAFEX in the chat for everybody, and I will send it out on the e-blast, and I will put it up on the website. So thank you,
And then
Pat.
California rare fruit growers also. They have a beautiful journal, and I've learned a lot from them, and I learned so much. I bought a lifetime membership with them because I keep learning. And they are doing things that are for people that are food challenged, hungry. They have like the chapter that I'm in here in San Diego has a food forest for families that are very financially challenged. And on weekends, the members go volunteer and work on that food forest to supply people who are hungry.
Oh, that's wonderful. All right, well. Anybody else have any other questions?
I was gonna say,
Think
let the
about
guard.
what to do with all my worm castings. I've got a bunch of worm casting powder,
Lucky you.
and now
Send 'em
I
to
have to
me.
give up my community garden plot. So I'm going to be gardening in pots this year. So I
Yeah,
will
you can add it to your
fertilize
pot.
often, but I can now. Is it better to lay that worm casing stuff in layers or mix it in?
Yeah, I would probably, if you have a wheelbarrow or a big tub, what you could do is use whatever you're going to use for your potting mix, and then also the worm castings, maybe like 2/3 potting mix, 1/3 worm castings, or even, yeah, maybe depends what your other soil is, but you could do 2/3, 1/3, and then if you can, I would just mix it all up in a wheelbarrow or a big tub or something like that.
Eileen was saying compost. She wants to compost in an egg-shaped clay container. Do you know anything about that? Where she can
No.
get one? Mark, have you ever heard of that?
Egg-shaped. Oh.
No. No, I haven't.
I know they have, like, they're starting to compost people after in egg-shaped compost things, but I've never heard about regular compost. It's
No.
biodynamic farming. No, I have not heard of that. We'll have to look that up.
There is a thing called a Johnson stew reactor, I believe, for composting. A lot of people are taking cage tanks, the 200-gallon cage tanks, cutting the top off and then layering it all out and doing compost that way that doesn't have to be mixed so much. They put PVC tubes in for aeration, and then they can also drain off compost teas off the bottom now and then. So I think it's called a Johnson stew reactor, if I'm correct.
Yeah, I don't see anything here for, I see how to put eggshells in your compost. I don't see anything about that. We'll have to look that up. And Johnson stew reactor. Oh, okay.
Yes, that's
I
correct.
found it's Johnson Sue, SU. So here's a link on how to build one of those. So I'll put that in there too. See, we always learn something new on these calls. Maybe even Megan's learning something.
I know. I always learn new things. That's what I love about gardening. There's always new things to learn. It's a very deep.
Yeah, they should call
hobby.
it practicing gardening, like practicing law or practicing medicine.
Yeah, exactly. So Melissa asked, what's the oldest seeds you can use? You have plenty of seeds from Home Depot last year. Yeah, you can definitely use last year's seeds. Onions are one that they recommend that you buy new every year. I have to be honest that
I heard
I've had
spinach. I heard spinach doesn't do well. Old spinach seed. I heard that somewhere.
Yeah, usually it's onions. I believe parsley you're supposed to grow or buy each year, although I just buy parsley plants. I don't start the seeds. But everything else, partly it depends on how you store it. I tend to go through my seeds before I order seeds, and I throw out anything that's 3 to 4 years old. mostly because I don't want to take the chance that things aren't going to germinate, because in Wisconsin we have such a short season. And if I plant, especially if I direct seed something and it doesn't germinate, I'm not going to know for a few
Parsley
weeks.
is really hard for me to get, even just to get it going. It takes forever to germinate. And Mark said that the paper towel test. So if you put, I guess,
Mhm.
put 10 seeds in a wet paper towel and, 7 come up, then you have a 70% germination rate.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And then there's also, you can also think about, there's also seed vigor, which is sometimes what I worry about. Like if it germinates, but has it lost some of its vigor? So if I plant it, is it not going to grow as big or produce as much? So it's really up to you what your risk tolerance is. But yeah, in general, I kind of get rid of seeds that are 4-ish years old, even if I did a germination test. But yeah, germination test is great.
I don't know. I'm getting a lot of seed catalogs in the mail, so
Great
it's
time to
hard.
look at
I
seeds.
have like a photo, one of those big photo cases in my basement, and they're all full of seeds. And every time a seed catalog comes, I'm thinking, oh, I need that. Oh, I need that. It's like I'm like a heroin addict in a poppy field. I can't stop.
Yeah, I know. They're so beautiful and colorful pictures.
How to keep the darn squirrels from eating the sunflower heads? Get an attack cat.
BB gun? No.
Oh, the catalogs I like best. I like Baker Creek, and I like I don't.
You had high mowing on the website.
Oh yeah, High Mowing. I love them. Their catalog was pretty big this year. I got Johnny's, and I was kind of like looking through it. There's a lot of hybrids in there.
And Johnny's is got bought by Monsanto.
Yeah, well, anyway, their prices went way up. It was ridiculous. And I'm like, well, even if I did like Johnny's, I'm not going to order from you because
Some of their seeds are coated with toxics that become systemic. So you've got to be careful with them.
yeah, so I don't order anything from them. What about you, Megan? Do you have a favorite?
I like High Mowing and Johnny's, and I do like Seed Savers Exchange.
Yes, and so I'm going to be going next weekend is the Garden Expo, and my friend Michelle and I are going, and she was like, well, I don't think we're going to buy anything. I said, Michelle, do you know how many thousands of seeds there's going to be there? We will be buying something. It's like,
Yeah, so I actually don't think that that's true that Johnny's is owned by Monsanto.
I've never heard that, but I wouldn't. I know they're gobbling up these companies.
So I do see an article that says, so I would Google that and read some articles. There's some articles about it.
Site tells you that some of their seeds are coated.
Right, but that doesn't mean they're owned by Monsanto.
Well, they were bought by a GMO interest. I believe it was Monsanto.
I don't think that's true, but everybody should do their own research.
I read it a long time ago. There are beautiful charts. Acres USA had a chart years ago that the organic farmers read, and it showed what companies had been bought up by what companies, and it was scary. And the consolidation keeps going on.
Yeah, so it's good to look into what companies you're buying from.
Yeah. The botanical interest I like.
Yeah, they're good. And Renee's I like as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and what's the one that does the beautiful seed packages?
Oh, the one from New York?
Is it?
Yeah, Hudson Valley Seed Company.
Yeah, I went to the Heirloom Festival in California several years ago, and they had a huge stand there. And I spent so much time there just looking at their seed packets because the artwork's so beautiful. So,
well, thanks everyone for your questions. I love talking gardening. I do have to go. It's dinner time here in Tucson.
Dinner time here too.
But yeah, I'll be back.
Well, everybody, I'll be sending out all these links tomorrow, and thank you very much. Thanks, Megan.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Happy gardening.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.